All right, stepping into the studio right now is a man that. Well, let me try and set this up, and Harry explained to me. This is a man named Harry Smith. He is an attorney in Chicago, who was the attorney for Kathleen Savio prior to her death. He was the divorce attorney who represented Kathleen Savio in the divorce from Drew Peterson. Also, is a man who had contact during that and subsequently with Stacy Peterson. And we want to hear your story, because this is a story we have not... your name has surfaced in a few places, but you have not told your story to anybody here, and I think it is a unique one, and I want you to be able to tell it. First of all, when were you hired by Kathleen Savio as the attorney?
I think the beginning of all this, and I want to say good afternoon, Roe, and thanks for having me. And the story that we're talking about is already told essentially in court records and documents, and I think maybe I just have a good overview because I was involved through the entirety of that divorce case, and then after Kathleen Savio died and until today. But originally, Kathleen Savio came to see myself and my partner Brian Grady about an order of protection she'd obtained in Will County, and that was against Drew, and then subsequent to that, a divorce was filed.
And how long before the divorce was filed did she come to you about the order of protection?
Weeks.
Did she ask you to obtain the order of protection for her?
She had gone and gotten it by herself, and then we had gone in and represented her on it subsequent to her obtaining the order of protection. And
then at that point she'd moved out of the house, or what was going on there?
It's a little different here, but actually Drew had purchased a residence in close proximity to the marital residence where they lived with their children at the time, so he was living close by.
Mm-hmm.
Shortly thereafter. So they had two separate residences within the same community.
Okay. And why had she asked for the order of protection?
There were allegations of domestic strife, I guess, and ultimately that was resolved by an agreed order in court.
Okay, and what does that mean?
At that time, Drew, until very recently, Drew was a police officer in Bolingbrook, and he was not able to, at least our perception was, continue to be a police officer with an active order of protection against him in the state of Illinois, and therefore, for him to continue to work that position and carry a firearm and do his job, that order of protection could not remain in place. We discussed the fact that they had to consider that, and we discussed the fact that a divorce was pending, and then reached an agreement to dismiss that order of protection, and Kathleen remained in the home and had exclusive possession of the residence. That's how they resolved that issue together.
All right. And in your dealings with Drew Peterson during the divorce, obviously anybody who's been through a divorce, generally your spouse, your soon-to-be ex-spouse's attorney is never your favorite person on the planet Earth. But did you have any kind of extracurricular contact with him, or was there anything that happened that gave you any kind of pause?
I saw Drew quite a bit during the course of the divorce, and you have accurately depicted the relationship between attorneys and the sort of the counterpart spouse. But no, I had some real rational conversations with Drew, and he was interested throughout the course of the divorce trying to get it settled. Of course, we didn't share an agreement as to where that was all going to go, but there was never anything unusual other than the normal strife. Sat through some hearings with him and waited around the hallway for some criminal cases to start. And, these are some intense subjects. And I think that him being a police officer probably played into the fact that he was really calm, understated, and under control during these proceedings generally.
Mm-hmm. And then when the divorce actually went through, was there an actual trial or just an agreement that they came to strike a deal?
This divorce never actually went through in the sense that you're talking about. We did something called a bifurcated divorce. Without getting too technical, there had to be a divorce in name and on paper, and on the grounds of irreconcilable differences, my client and Drew Peterson were divorced. But the case and just about every other issue other than the grounds for the divorce remained alive and open for litigation.
So the separation of the property, which is generally done in a divorce and all outlined, had not been done yet?
Never happened.
Okay. So do you know the date of the divorce? I'm like an attorney. I'm like examining. This is like cross-examining. Yeah. Tell me if I'm doing a good job here, Harry.
This is outstanding work on your part.
Thank you. I'm like in moot court. So what was it? When were they actually divorced?
I don't remember. I don't remember the date of the entry of the dissolution based on grounds alone. I don't recall that.
Okay, and that's what that instrument is.
The litigation continued after that.
All right, and then how soon after that was she found dead?
I don't know the exact months. I've obviously had to recount that a couple times in the last few months if people have talked to me about it, but it was some months afterwards.
Some months, well, under a year.
Yes.
Yeah, 6, 7 months, something like that.
And we were in court still trying to work out issues of child support and maintenance and property distribution and all sorts of stuff.
Now, why did they agree to that? It's an interesting deal because generally you want all of that wrapped up in advance. Why would there be some reason not to wrap that up?
There was a very serious reason in this case. Stacy was going to have a baby, and that was without health care coverage. And everybody at some point sort of sat down and said, forget the anger and sort of all the other strife we're dealing with. If he's not married to her, she cannot get onto his insurance coverage, and they were going to have this child without any health care benefits. So I talked to Kathy about that, and she realized that wasn't an appropriate thing to have happen either. She understood that all her rights and interests in the divorce and any of the division of assets and custody of her children would remain open and litigatable issues, and so she said, okay, we can get divorced on these grounds. And it was, ultimately, for all the
basically,
tension, it was a magnanimous act to say, okay, we'll agree.
So do we understand that at the point at which they decided they were going to get a divorce, Drew had presented a pregnant Stacy Peterson into this situation say, hey, I got to go do this?
Stacy was involved throughout because she was a witness to she was a victim and a witness to criminal charges against Kathleen Savio. She was.
Let's go back and explain that because that's already been out in the record a little bit. They had a there was a confrontation between Kathleen Savio and Drew Peterson in a public place, right? In a parking lot or something.
There were a couple, and one of them resulted in a charge against my client for a domestic violence to Drew, I believe, and one of them resulted in a battery charge between Kathy and Stacy. And so there were two criminal charges. So Stacy was a part of this litigation throughout.
Okay, so Stacy had pressed a charge against Kathleen Savio for hitting her or something? Is that right?
Yeah.
Okay, and so that's how she became. And this is an important part of the story because this is how she became familiar with you through this case, right?
No, I would say even prior to that, Stacy had come to court with Drew, whether it be for support or whatever, but I don't think there was ever a time when anybody denied that Stacy was a relevant part of the situation. So I had contact with Stacy, and she had been in court prior to that, but certainly then she became more heavily involved, and people were aware just because she was there, physically that she was pregnant. That wasn't something that surprised anybody. We knew that was coming.
All right, and so they get the divorce. Everybody agrees to it. That seems like the prudent way to go, at least.
Yes.
They get the divorce, and now again you have all of these, including all the property division issues, and like you said, maintenance support for There's in Illinois. There's two different payments that you can make. They don't call it alimony anymore. There's child support, and then there's maintenance, which is technically the same thing as alimony that you pay to a spouse. All of that stuff, all those dollars right there. How was Kathleen Savio living at that point?
Through temporary support from Drew.
Okay.
There was a temporary court order in place that provided for an amount to be distributed to her for child support, for temporary maintenance.
Was this a significant amount of money?
No. I mean, his salary was not outrageous as a police officer. I don't exactly remember at the time, but it was. Nobody was living well, I don't think, at that time. It's whenever two households arrive out of one, it's never going to be the best case scenario.
Right. So, and
was he already? I'm sorry, Harry, but was he already paying some sort of alimony to wives number 1 and 2 as well?
That's funny. I believe, and my recollection of it is that he had custody of from his second wife the children, so he wouldn't have been paying anything on that. And I don't recall ever hearing that he had a prior court-ordered obligation to pay anything, but he might have. I might be wrong, but I don't recall that.
Okay. We're talking to Harry Smith. He's the attorney for Kathleen Savio and also had some contact with Stacy Peterson right before her disappearance, and we will talk about that in just a second. But just to set the table here. So, all right, so we have this divorce. Are you continuing to negotiate a settlement to divide the assets here in the period of time which Kathleen Savio was still living with this temporary agreement before she died?
Absolutely.
All right. And the day that she died, let's go to that. You are clearly you're contacted at some point, not too soon, not too far after her passing. What was your thought immediately?
Natural reactions, I'm sure, and I felt horrible for her family and her children because I'd seen them on several occasions in court, and that is an awful thing. It was a little different because in this situation, my client had reached out in writing and orally, not only to me, but to others, talking about a fear that something like this could happen to her. So it was a little bit more ominous, to hear that she'd actually passed.
She had written you letters concerned that Drew was going to kill her or hurt her?
She had. I had a copy of a letter that had been sent to some other people, and she'd written some letters to me generally that did talk about that.
Okay, so she was fearful, and was this in that period of time after they were divorced, but before she died?
No,
this is before she was divorced.
This is throughout the entire time period.
Okay, and how many of these sort of letters from the grave were there? Would you say?
There's a lot of them. I mean, it wasn't always a letter saying I, Kathy Savio, state that. That's not how it went. But there were allusions to these fears in correspondences to my office. Certainly in the letter that I think I've seen out there publicly that was sent to a couple of public officials.
That said he'll do this and make it look like an accident.
Yeah, I mean, that was sort of the tenor of it. And it's tough because there are many allegations that occur in the course of a divorce case. So it's, sometimes you hear that and put it aside, but she did persistently make those claims. That's correct.
Okay. Now, let's flash forward here. Now she has passed away. We have Kathleen, her family. Are they coming to you? Are they saying, hey, this is an issue we don't think we've got closure on? There
were several people surrounding her that I talked with shortly after she passed that certainly felt that way. And, it's an interesting point you say closure because my original perception was, well, that sort of ends everything and the litigation is over and whatever may happen outside of that will happen. But that it turns out that wasn't the case. And the case law indicates that when you enter a bifurcated divorce, when you get divorced on grounds only and you reserve all these other issues, it turned out that the divorce wasn't over. And now that there was a separate estate representing Kathy's interest in the divorce, that still had an oppositional position to Drew. So it was a very, very odd situation. All right. Now,
and that's the problem is because what we have here is multiple layers of people who have a vested interest. And that's what I want to get to. They have a vested interest in how the outcome of that is going to be. And if I were Drew Peterson's attorney, God forbid, I would be concerned that, I would make the argument, hey, this is the problem that we have here, that there is... all these people had an interest in this dollar amount, so they're going to say anything about my client. Did they come to you? Were you in contact with? He didn't have Joe Brodsky at that point. Right?
No, a great guy named Alex Beck was doing the representation at the time that Kathy passed, and he and Drew, quite honestly, I think they believed the way I believed. Came to court shortly after Kathy had passed, and I think they wanted litigation to be done, and had filed a motion to essentially, finalize or dismiss the remaining counts of the divorce. And I think they were thinking, as I was, that the action was over. Mm-hmm. And then, the judge and myself and Mr. Bex, came into contact with this law and realized that wasn't the case. And now we were all of a sudden standing there with an active divorce case with only one client remaining.
All right. And now let's move forward a little bit, and then we'll come back and fill in some of the details here. There is a point at which you, again, have contact with Stacy Peterson, in which she is contacting you about representing her against Drew Peterson. Is that right?
Oddly, as I was thinking about this today as I was coming down here, I think I actually had contact with her maybe a year after that whole proceeding finally wrapped up because she had referred me a couple of clients, strangely enough. Mm-hmm. And I'd had contact with her very briefly and hadn't really...
She had referred... Now, wait a second. Let me see if I got this right. She actually had... She had pressed charges against your client, and yet she's for hitting her, and she is now coming to you and saying, "Hey, I've got somebody who needs your help."
It's probably not as unusual as you would think, and honestly, her and Drew throughout the case didn't really have anger with me, so I think the perception...
So it's just about knowing a lawyer.
I think that's probably true. And so, she referred some litigation work to me, some small stuff that I did, and then, I did hear from her And now I can't remember the date, but some couple months ago.
Those recommendations didn't seem strange to you, though, Harry, at all?
It's not all that
really
odd. I was a prosecutor for quite some time in DuPage County, and when I left the state's attorney's office, a lot of the people that I had put in jail sought me out to hire me to represent them.
When's the last time you talked to Stacy Peterson?
I'm sorry I don't remember the date. I can tell you that it would have been the Friday before she disappeared. So if she disappeared that weekend, it would have been, I believe, Wednesday and then Friday of the week before.
And what was the substance of that conversation?
There's a pending investigation, and out of respect to her family and to Drew and to their children, I'm not going to talk about the substance of that conversation. But in fairness, without, I don't think it'd be a shock to anybody, she did contact me for information regarding a dissolution of marriage.
Was there anything?
So wait. So she was, in your opinion, she was seeking a divorce on that Friday before she disappeared.
She at least wanted information about what the possible results were and how it would go, I suppose.
Okay, so she's seeking information.
That's true.
Putting it.
Harry, you had spoken with her in the past. You had said, did you notice anything, without going into specifics, was there anything dramatically different in the way she conducted herself?
No, I wouldn't say that her...
Didn't seem desperate in any way, shape, or form?
Absolutely not desperate. Not desperate.
Yeah.
Just wanted information and wanted to know.
Okay, and we don't know if she had contacted Drew about this. And is there any way that you can indicate to us whether or not Drew knew she was seeking a divorce?
No.
Would you have any way of knowing that?
I don't know if when she first called me, Drew was aware of that. My guess would be no, but there was nothing specific said to me that let me know that she may have discussed it with Drew before.
I think that puts you in the timeline of being the last person not in her family and not Drew to have had contact with her.
That was an odd feeling that I had on that Monday when I saw the state police bulletin.
And then what was your reaction? Your human reaction.
Sure. I was, like everybody, shocked. No, not like everybody. I shouldn't say that. Like I would be in this circumstance because I had this sort of odd feeling that I'd been through this once before. And that's, and that's a natural reaction. Then after that, I just got a hold of the authorities and made sure I cooperated with what was going on.
Okay, and now why is it that your story has not been prominently told at this point? I mean, here we are months later into this investigation. You seem to be probably one of the most central figures in this in terms of contact and being able to sew the entire story together. Why are we hearing right now from you?
Well, I suspect some of the information I have are documents and court dates and rulings that would have been available to the media, and they could see that through the court file. I suspect that maybe nobody was aware up to this point that I spoke with Stacy at all, so that might have been part of it. That might be a little nuance that some people had missed. So, this
are authorities aware of that?
Absolutely.
Are authorities aware that you had spoken with Stacy on that Friday prior?
Yes.
And that she was seeking information about a divorce?
Yes. Yes.
All right. And can you give us any insight as to why you think that this investigation has gone as slowly as it has? Clearly, without finding Stacy Peterson in some shape or form, that clearly has that's one answer to this. But beyond that, and maybe now with the Kathleen Savio change in the status of the determination of her death, do you see this moving any faster than it has already moved?
No, but you absolutely just described one of the reasons, and that is, Stacy has not been found, so there are no presumptions that can be made by anybody at law. And secondly, there's a lot of time that passed with the Kathleen Savio situation, and obviously it would take a lot of time and money to have experts and go through this. And we, without being cement heads about all this, we got to be relevant to the fact that Drew has a family he's still trying to raise, and these presumptions are swirling everywhere out there. So I think there's been a lot of factors that have slowed this process.
So you think that it's been a very, very fair attempt to gather facts?
I think Jim Glasgow is doing everything he can to be diligent.
Will County State's Attorney.
That's correct. To do everything that he can to be diligent in this circumstance.
All right. Don't move. And I mean that. Don't move, Harry. Harry Smith is with us. He is the attorney for Kathleen Savio. He is also an attorney who had the last contact an attorney had, we believe, with Stacy Peterson before she disappeared. She disappeared on a Sunday. He talked to her on a Friday where she was seeking information for a divorce. This is new information you're hearing right here for the first time. on the Roe Conn Show. So thank you for sharing this with us first. But clearly, I think this is a game-changing situation.
The Roe Conn Show on 890 AM WLS.
All right, back to the action we go. In the studio with us is Harry Smith. Harry is an attorney, family law attorney, and he was Kathy Savio's attorney, who represented Kathy Savio in the divorce from Drew Peterson. Also represented her in the cases in which she was accused of hitting Stacy Peterson, right? Represent her in that as well.
I'm pretty sure. I don't think it was two cases where Stacy was the victim. I think it was one where Stacy was the alleged victim and one where Drew was the alleged victim. So it was probably a domestic violence charge in one and then a battery charge in another.
And the piece of information that we are learning today for the first time is that she had contacted you on the Friday prior to her disappearance, seeking information about a divorce from Drew Peterson.
It was Wednesday and then another brief conversation on Friday. That is correct.
All right. To the phones we go, 591-8900. Doug, you're on WLS. Hi, Doug.
Hi. I was wondering, was the coroner's inquiry aware of, like, the recalled, rescinded restraining order and of the, written out, fear of threats that she had?
Okay, let's go back and discuss that a little bit. That we're talking about the coroner's inquiry into the death of Kathy Savio when it was assumed that she had drowned in the dry bathtub, and they had come up with their findings in which they thought it was an accidental death. Were they aware that she had written to people saying that she thought that Drew was going to do her harm?
At the time that the state police were conducting the investigation into Kathy Peterson's death, my partner Jay Fuller had compiled everything that we had to give them, but I don't know that Jay ever gave anything to the coroner. So I guess unless the coroner was somehow working in conjunction with the state police investigation, and I should also say I didn't testify at that coroner's inquiry and inquest, and am not privy to what happened. So I don't know all the information that was given to him. I would assume so.
Now, why wouldn't you have? Why wouldn't information you've had have been relevant to them?
Well, I mean, hearsay is admissible, so somebody could certainly forward whatever facts they'd gathered through the court file or through me to that hearing. That would have been possible. That information can be delivered from another person, so I would not necessarily be present for something like that just because I was the attorney for the divorce.
Okay, and do you think that now that they go back and they look at that, there was just one of the. Let's explain this a little bit. In Will County, it's a coroner's. It's a jury. It's a number of medical examiners who look at this information, right?
That's only my understanding, correct?
And that they then they come up with a consensus about what happened. One of the jurors, one of the ME jurors on the inquest, just last week apologized for his taking part in it, saying, we should have looked harder. We should, there were all of these things that we saw, and we weren't quite sure about, but we couldn't put it all together. Is basically, I'm paraphrasing here, but that's what he was saying. We couldn't put it all together to come up, and we didn't have enough information to come up with a determination of homicide. And again, I think we need to be clear here that homicide does not necessarily mean murder. Homicide means death at the hand of another person. Murder is a legal charge that has to be, a jury has to determine whether somebody was murdered, right? I mean, that's something it's important to say. We always make that clarification. So now, now that it has been now that the news has come to you, Harry Smith, that this is a homicide, what is your thought about that?
Only that somebody else, another group of professionals, have either taken a more intense look at it or a different look at it, and my perception of this probably isn't relevant because I haven't been invited in to offer anything to that. And
but you had, and we established this, during the last break that you had seen correspondence in which she was fearful that Drew was going to do something to her, and we are all now aware of a story that she had told to her relative saying, "Hey, if something happens to me, it's Drew."
Certainly my personal feelings or perceptions on it, are from a position of an attorney in this case, but I'm going to agree with you that, yes, Kathy Peterson, Savio, thought that Drew was going to kill her. I'm going to agree with that statement because certainly a lot of people heard that a lot. As
her attorney, you would, having represented her and based on your experience with her, you believe that?
I don't believe it. I know that that's what she was saying consistently.
Okay. And what is and now that we're on the other side of the of this piece of information. Is there a way? I mean, in terms of court trial, is there anything that you can add to a potential trial for her involving her death?
I'm not sure, and obviously those are decisions that the Will County State's Attorney's Office would have to make.
And you've handed over everything, all the paperwork to them, right?
I've cooperated with them from the beginning of this issue. It's absolutely correct. But what I can offer, as I've already said, are things that are in the public record. I can certainly support the concerns that I believe they're already aware of on behalf of my client. So I don't know. I don't know if they would have a specific use other than that for me as a witness. And being a former prosecutor, I don't know that I would.
Okay, and it seems though to me that there's, if I could just talk to you as sort of an observer here, as opposed to a participant in it for a second, it seems to me now there's been so much double second guessing of what's happened here in terms of this case, how long it has taken. Certainly, there's a ton of second guessing, which led to the re-inquest, the death inquest, to change the determination of Kathleen Savio's death. That now these guys are constantly on their heels. Everybody who's involved in this case in a professional level is constantly on their heels trying to figure out where the next press inquiry is going to come from, where the next witness is going to pop up from, what's going to happen there to make them, to push them toward this. Do you think that there has ever been at any point any reason that anybody slowed anything down because Drew Peterson was a well-known law enforcement officer in Bolingbrook?
Not involved in any of the investigation that I've now seen since Stacy's disappearance, and not involved with the state police that I spoke to at the time that Kathleen Savio had passed away.
So you don't. So it never come up that Drew was a cop in Bolingbrook, and that was other than the fact that
was so inherent to this whole situation, and other than the fact that it was awkward for sort of everybody being there doing criminal trials, and Drew too. I mean, he's standing in the hallway getting to go in and be a victim in a battery case or a witness to a battery case in a courthouse where he's got to practice and be a witness professionally. I mean, it was always some sort of sense of awkwardness for everybody because of his role as a police officer. But, he went through the same process everybody goes through and wasn't treated any differently, certainly in those circumstances. He testified and it all went the same way.
Okay, let's go back. Let's go back to the end of the story here for a second. Kathleen Savio is now divorced from Drew Peterson, although they do not have a financial reconciliation of their assets. Right?
True. That's absolutely right.
They have not at this point. The assets are still not divided, and there is a will. Right? Kathleen Savio has a will that is now being contested. The signature. It's not. I'm not sure if it's officially a will or it's a determination.
No, it's a. I mean, no. Right after she passed away, that was not there. I recall. So obviously, this is my memory to it. I recall Drew's attorney making representations that there was a will, but it did not surface for a long
You'd never
time.
seen this will?
No, absolutely not.
As her divorce attorney, you'd not seen the will. Did you ever ask her about a will, to your recollection?
Yes.
And did she say she had one?
No.
She said she did not have a will.
I seem to recall she said she didn't have one.
So she doesn't have a will, and now all of a sudden one pops up with a signature that doesn't look like her signature that had been established on all kinds of other legal documents.
I don't know that. To be honest with you, I don't know that.
But one pops up.
Certainly a will was presented. It was presented in probate court very naturally. Richard Kavanaugh was the attorney at that point in time for either the estate of the children or he had a function in it with me. A gentleman who I believe was Drew's uncle came to court and was the executor or trustee of the estate if Kathy were to pass on the document that they had. And at that point in time, several months after her death, I was dismissed as attorney for the estate because he was now the person in charge of the estate and didn't wish for me to pursue the case any longer.
Okay. And was he hired by her family?
I have no idea. When you say hired, I shouldn't say it. I know that he wasn't hired. He was named in the will is what the allegation was. The uncle of Drew. Is that what you were asking me about? Mm-hmm. Yes. He was just there saying I am the executor or trustee of the will, and I'm
of Kathleen Savio, Drew Peterson's ex-wife. Drew Peterson's ex-wife's will states that Drew Peterson's uncle is the executor of that will.
Yes. Now, in fairness...
And that has a signature, and I'll say this, you don't have to say this, that is a signature that everybody has now called into question as to the veracity of that signature. So if it's a signature that people are looking at, just citizens are eyeballing, rank amateurs are eyeballing and looking at it going, that doesn't look anything like her signature, let alone what experts will say. That document is the only document that ties up those assets.
It resolved the issue of a continued battle between Kathleen Savio's estate and I guess Drew's interest in the divorce. It resolved that because now his uncle controlled that estate, and I guess his uncle could have continued to disagree with Drew, but my impression, and I was out of the case at that point, is that they resolved those issues. And I do want to say, in fairness to Drew, he was on that will as well. In other words, they executed a joint document that said if something happens to one of us or both of us, Drew's uncle will control the estate. It's not as if it was just a document, I believe.
But they'd already been divorced. Did they have it? To your knowledge, did they have a good working relationship after the initial divorce?
They did not have a working relationship from the day I met her.
And so in those months between the divorce and her death, do you know if they had contact?
You see, we were still in court every week after what you're calling the divorce because it was just a judgment of dissolution entered on grounds. We still had to have a hearing regarding, and all sorts of issues regarding discovery and deciding child support and maintenance. That was all still out there. He had a pension that had to be attached. Even so, the litigation continued, and no, they had no working relationship.
They had no working relationship. So
absolutely none.
Okay. And was there any kind of restraining order in effect?
I think the only thing that remained in place was that she had exclusive possession of what was determined to be the marital residence, where he had lived with her before he moved into the residence with Stacy.
So do you know if Kathleen Savio had any contact with Stacy Peterson in that period of time? Because Stacy, they had at that point, after the divorce, how soon after the divorce, do you even know this, did Drew marry Stacy?
It had to be almost immediately after we entered the bifurcated judgment because they needed to get I believe, my perception, what his attorney told me was they needed to get medical benefits in place. So that was almost immediately
for her
after.
Baby, Harry, for
That's
the health,
correct.
yeah,
for the child. And when you say did they have contact, I don't know. They wouldn't have seen each other out in public, but they would see each other in court all the time.
Okay, and that was an animus relationship at that point?
Yes. Probably natural. I mean, if you imagine the circumstances, yes.
And there had already been an assault charge or a battery charge. Battery charge, right?
They had a fight. I mean,
Yeah.
a real fight. So yes.
Where punches were thrown.
Yes.
Yeah. All right, and now just to go to the end part of the story, those last two conversations. Just again, want to get this on record. Those last two conversations that you had with Stacy Peterson on the Wednesday and the Friday before she had disappeared. She at that point was just seeking information for or about a dissolution of her marriage with Drew Peterson.
Yes, she called to discuss divorce issues and the like.
And then the next thing you know, you hear that she has disappeared.
Correct.
A couple days later.
I found out on Monday I was in court, and my secretary had told me, Dawn had told me that, did you hear that this had happened? Now,
it's an interesting thing because, as you'll recall, we in the media were a day or two late to connect the fact that we had a missing woman in the southwest suburbs, and there's already a well-established case of missing woman in the southwest suburbs in Lisa Stevick. So now we have another missing young woman in the southwest suburbs, and there's pictures of her, and we're getting the picture of her with Drew. And as a matter of fact, the first couple of days of reporting, they were showing Drew identifying him as her brother, not her husband. And there was no connection to the death of his third wife, Kathleen Savio. It was about 3 or 4 days into this story, is my recollection, that all of a sudden the Kathleen Savio connection kicked in. Now, you knew. There had to be a moment in the back of your mind, Harry, that was chilling.
Well, certainly when I got the information in court, it was in the front of my mind. So obviously
before she had died, before Kathleen Savio had died, when you got the information.
When I got the information from my secretary, Dawn, in court, when she called and said that there is a report out there that Stacy Peterson is missing, certainly that was a very odd feeling, and it just said, okay, who am I supposed to contact? Because the state police had a number out there, and you were able to. They asked you to contact that number, so I did immediately.
All right, Harry, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Appreciate your honesty and your diligence in this. And again, we've had a ton of calls, people asking, now all this information that you've shared with us has already been shared with investigators.
Yes, that's true.
All right. That's a very important thing, but it's the first time that we're hearing about it in the media. So thank you for doing it right here, Harry. Appreciate it.
All right.
The Roe Conn Show on 890 AM WLS.